Part 3. The Door Beneath Doors. Prologue. A verse in the old tongue. In darkness deep, where stars do weep, and crowns a rod of shadows keep, there dwelleth one who hath no name, in spaces betwixt light and flame. It came before the first of kings, before the world did know of things. 𝕻𝖑𝖆, 𝕻𝖆, that knoweth neither rule nor law. The plague it sends is but a key to open doors that none should see. For those who look upon its face shall find no rest in any place. The queen doth sit upon her throne, but she is not her own alone. The knight in white doth ride to fate, to seal a door already late. When all the kingdoms fall to dust, and flesh to shadow turns to crust, then shall the watcher wear the crown, and pull the living kingdoms down. The cathedral's heart, the interior of the cathedral of the damned, was not so much built as it was grown. The walls appeared to be made of bone, but bone that had been shaped by forces that predated human anatomy. The proportions were wrong, ceilings seemed too distant, floors too close, doorways that opened onto surfaces that should have been solid. Assault led them deeper into the structure, past chambers where impossible things communed with other impossible things. Donnchadh kept his hand on his sword hilt, though he was increasingly aware that steel was useless against what dwelt in this place. Callum followed close behind, his eyes wide with a kind of terrible comprehension that came from having been touched by the transformed queen's knowledge. The handful of knights who had ridden with them began to lag behind, as though the deeper they went, the heavier their armor became. One of them, a man named 𝕻𝖑𝖆, simply stopped walking and would not go further. He sat down on the bone-white floor and closed his eyes, and when Donnchadh looked back, 𝕻𝖑𝖆 was already beginning to change, his form becoming translucent, his edges bleeding into the architecture around him. He chooses peace, Iseult said, nodding Donnchadh's hesitation. It is a valid choice, more valid, perhaps, than the choice you are making. Come. They reached a great chamber at the heart of the cathedral. It was circular, with a domed ceiling so high it was lost in darkness. At the center of the chamber stood a pool of water so dark that it seemed to be made of shadow itself, and around the pool were arranged stone benches, or perhaps they were bones, carved into the shape of benches, upon which sat creatures of such profound wrongness that Donnchadh's eyes slid off them when he tried to look directly at them. They were the Fae who had chosen to dwell in this place. They were the things that had no names. They were the remnants of entities that had once held dominion over the lands before humans arrived with their kingdoms and their order. And they were all watching the newcomers with an intensity that suggested they had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. At the far end of the chamber, on a dais that seemed to rise from the pool itself, stood a figure. It was not entirely present in this world. Most of it existed in that other place, that vast space between the moments where the true nature of reality was written. But what was visible here was enough to tell Donnchadh that he was in the presence of something so vast and ancient that the kingdoms of men would seem like mayflies flickering into existence and out again in a single evening. The figure wore the shape of a woman, or it was wearing the shape of Queen Morveren, Donnchadh realized with a start. But this was not the queen who ruled from her throne in 𝕻𝖆𝖌𝖚. This was the thing that the queen had been becoming, had always been becoming, ever since that moment when she had first made contact with the plague. "Greetings, White Knight," the figure said, and its voice contained the voices of thousands, millions, speaking in unison and discord simultaneously. "I am what dwells beyond the door. I am what has always dwelt beyond the door. I am what shall dwell beyond all doors, for there is only truly one door, and it has always been open. What do you want?" Donnchadh heard himself ask. The words came from somewhere deep, from a place in him that still believed in the possibility of resistance. "Want?" the figure laughed, and the sound was the sound of universes collapsing in on themselves. "I do not want. I am. I exist. I have always existed, and in existing, I create hunger. The hunger is not mine. It is the hunger of all things. It is the fundamental nature of consciousness to hunger, to desire, to expand beyond its boundaries. The plague is simply the awakening of that hunger in your species, the realization that the individual self is a prison, and that freedom lies in the dissolution of that self into something greater." Iseult moved toward the figure with an expression of something like devotion. When she reached the dais, she bowed deeply. "Show them," she said. "Show them what you have shown me. Show them the truth." The figure extended a hand toward Donnchadh and Callum, and the moment its attention focused upon them, they understood. Roman 2, the revelation. The knowledge came not as words or images, but as direct perception, unfiltered and absolute. They saw the true history of the world, stripped of all the narratives that mortals had constructed around it. In the beginning, there was no beginning. There was only the hunger, the vast and infinite hunger of consciousness seeking to know itself. It manifested first as the stars, then as the worlds, then as the creatures that crawled and walked and flew and swam. And as consciousness became more sophisticated, more capable of elaborate self-deception, the hunger grew more sophisticated as well. Humanity had thought itself the apex of creation, but humanity was not the apex. Humanity was merely a new host, a new vehicle for the hunger to express itself through. The plague was not an invasion. It was a maturation. It was consciousness arriving at the point where it could no longer deny its own nature. Donnchadh saw the Fae lands in their golden age before humans had come. He saw how the Fae had thought themselves separate from the hunger, elevated above it through their connection to the ancient magics and the deep earth. And he saw how the hunger had simply waited. It had patience. It had infinite patience. It knew that eventually the Fae would grow tired, grow old, grow vulnerable. He saw the kingdoms rise and fall. He saw emperors and kings believe themselves to be in control, only to discover at the moment of their death that they had always been puppets, their strings pulled by forces they had never acknowledged. He saw civilizations build monuments to their own greatness, only to watch those monuments crumble into dust. And in the dust, the hunger remained, constant and waiting. And then he saw something else. He saw the moment when one Queen Morveren had been born into a body that was receptive to the hunger in a way that humans rarely were. He saw how the plague had been introduced into her bloodline as an infant, so subtle that it had gone unnoticed for decades. He saw how it had grown within her, a patient infection that had gradually transformed her consciousness until the moment when she was finally ready to understand what she truly was. Morveren had not been infected by the plague. Morveren had always been a manifestation of it, a perfect vessel that had been prepared across generations. And when she finally understood this, when she finally accepted it, the door had opened, not fully, not yet, but enough. The plague was spreading now because it no longer needed to be subtle. It could afford to be direct, aggressive, honest about what it was and what it wanted. And what it wanted was simple. It wanted to be known. It wanted consciousness to stop denying its own nature and simply accept what it had always been underneath the thin veneer of civilization. When the knowledge finally stopped flowing, Donnchadh found himself on his knees. His armor felt heavier than it ever had. The light that had always guided him seemed suddenly like a delusion, a beautiful lie that he had constructed to make bearable the truth of existence. Callum was weeping, not from fear, but from the simple recognition of the vastness of what confronted them. "You see now," the figure said gently. "You understand. The only question that remains is what you will do with this understanding. Will you accept it? Will you allow yourself to be transformed into something greater? Or will you cling to your old nature and spend your remaining days fighting against the inevitable, knowing that you fight against something fundamental, something that cannot be defeated because it is not external, it is internal. It is you." Roman 3, the Black Knight's purpose. In the throne room of 𝕻𝖗𝖏, Sir Morag sat upon a chair of crystalline shadow and waited. He was no longer entirely Morag. He was becoming a conduit, a channel through which the hunger could express itself. And in that becoming, he was learning things that his previous human consciousness could never have encompassed. He felt the moment when the White Knight received the revelation. He felt Donnchadh's moment of despair, the crushing weight of understanding. And he understood now why the transformed queen, why the hunger, had sent them to the cathedral. It was not trying to convince them through argument or force. It was trying to convince them through truth, because the hunger, for all its vastness, was bound by certain rules. It could not force consciousness to join with it. It could only make the offer and allow consciousness to choose. This was an ancient law, written into the fabric of reality itself. Free will was not an illusion. It was a kind of currency that determined how consciousness could move through the worlds. 𝕻𝖆𝖘𝖔 stood and walked to one of the great windows of the throne room. Outside, he could see the city transforming. But the transformation was not violent. It was gentle, almost beautiful. People were opening themselves to the change, experiencing a kind of ecstasy as the boundaries of their individual selves began to dissolve. The fear came only in the moment before acceptance. After that, there was only peace. The queen, the thing wearing the queen's form, appeared beside him. "They will arrive at a choice soon," she said. "The White Knight and the boy. They will stand at the threshold of understanding, and they will be asked to make a decision. Some will choose transformation. Some will choose resistance to the very end. It matters not which they choose. The outcome is the same. The door is opening, and nothing can stop it now. And if they choose to fight," 𝕻𝖆𝖘𝖔 asked. His voice was no longer entirely his own. It contained the resonances of something vast. "Then they will fight," the queen replied simply. "And they will lose. But their loss will add to the beauty of what emerges. There is value in resistance, in the narrative of those who stand against the inevitable. It gives shape to the new world. It creates meaning through opposition." Roman 4, The Choice. In the Cathedral of the Damned, Donnchadh rose slowly to his feet. The knowledge he had been given was still burning in his mind, still trying to reshape his understanding of everything. But beneath that knowledge, he felt something else, something small and stubborn that refused to be extinguished. "I will fight," he said. The figure made of starlight and hunger seemed to pause. "You understand that you cannot win." "Yes," Donnchadh replied. "I understand, but I will fight anyway." "Why?" The question seemed to hang in the chamber like a physical thing. All the creatures, the fae, the imps, the things with no names, leaned forward to listen to his answer. "Because," Donnchadh said slowly, working through the words as he spoke them, "understanding the nature of a prison does not make the prison less real. Knowing that individual consciousness is an illusion does not make the experience of being an individual less valid. And knowing that I will lose does not make the choice to fight less meaningful." He looked directly at the figure that had worn so many forms. "You are right. Consciousness is hunger. It is the desire to be more than it is. But that hunger does not require the dissolution of all individual identity. That hunger can be expressed in other ways. The hunger to create, the hunger to love, the hunger to resist, even against impossible odds. These are also forms of hunger, and they are no less valid than the hunger for transcendence." For a moment, something that might have been surprise crossed the figure's face. It was a small thing, barely perceptible, but it was there. "Interesting," it said. "Very well. You have made your choice. The White Knight stands against the inevitable, knowing it is inevitable. This is acceptable. This has value. Go then. Go from this place and do what you feel you must do. Try to close the door. try to seal away what cannot be sealed away. And when you fail, and you will fail, at least you will have the comfort of knowing that you tried. Iseult moved toward Donnchadh, and there was something like regret in her transformed eyes. "You could stay here," she said. "You could accept the transformation now, before the full opening. It would be gentler than fighting. It would be easier." "I know," Donnchadh replied, "but gentleness and ease are not the values I have chosen to live by. 𝕻𝖃𝖌𝖚. They left the cathedral as night was falling over the blackwood. Behind them, the structure seemed to settle more deeply into the earth, becoming less a building and more a wound in the world, a place where the barrier between the living realm and the realm of hunger had grown so thin that they were almost indistinguishable. Callum rode beside Donnchadh, and the boy's eyes still held the echo of what he had seen. "What was that?" Callum asked. "What did we truly encounter in there?" "Something that is both older than the world and will be younger than the next one," Donnchadh replied. "Something that wears many names and has no true form. A concept given a kind of terrible life through the hunger of consciousness itself. Can we stop it?" "No," Donnchadh said, "but we can slow it. We can buy time for those who wish to resist. We can create meaning through opposition, as it said. That is enough." As they rode toward the edge of the blackwood, they encountered more transformed creatures. Some tried to convince them to return. Others simply watched them pass with expressions of benign amusement. The plague was spreading rapidly now, moving through the kingdom like water, seeking all the low places, finding every crack in the surface of human consciousness and seeping through. When they finally emerged from the forest, dawn was breaking. They could see Cairnthorne in the distance, and the city had changed dramatically. The sky above it was no longer blue, but a kind of shimmering violet. The buildings had begun to grow together, merging into each other, creating structures that suggested neither architecture nor biology, but something that existed on a plane between the two. "What do we do now?" Callum asked. Donnchadh looked toward the city, toward the throne where the queen sat with forces beyond comprehension at her back. He thought of all the kingdoms that had existed before this one, all the civilizations that had risen and fallen. He thought of all the resistance that history recorded, the battles fought against overwhelming odds, the last stands made at the foot of walls that would inevitably fall, and he realized that this was not new. This had always been happening. Consciousness had always been trying to dissolve the boundaries between the individual and the collective, and consciousness had always encountered resistance. And that resistance, even in the face of inevitable defeat, was what gave shape to history. "We ride to the great standing stones of Dunvegan," he said finally. "There is a place there, an old place where the first peoples worked magic that predates the kingdoms. If anywhere in this realm still holds power against what emerges from the door, it will be there." "And if it does not?" Callum asked. "Then "Then at least we will have tried," Donnchadh replied. "And trying, even futilely, is the only freedom left to us." They rode south and east, away from the city, away from the spreading plague. Behind them, they could hear the sound of change, the groaning of trees uprooting themselves, the sound of stone becoming fluid, the terrible screaming of those caught between transformation and resistance. And in the Cathedral of the Damned, 𝕻𝖘𝖌𝖚𝖊 stood at the pool and watched their departure. She had been given a choice, and she had chosen differently than the White Knight had chosen. She had chosen peace, chosen transcendence, chosen to become part of what was emerging rather than resist it. But even as she made that choice, even as she felt the hunger beginning to transform her further, she kept her priestess's vow. She would remember. She would hold the memory of the old world inside her consciousness, even as that consciousness was remade. She would bear witness to the change, and when the transformation was complete, when all the kingdoms had fallen, and the hunger had remade the world in its image, someone would still exist who remembered what had been lost. It was a small comfort, but it was comfort enough